part of your world, but like as a friend, by Seeking Tomorrow. Summary. In a Wakanda under the protection of two Black Panthers, Shuri has taken it upon herself to forge an alliance. It's a partnership, totally not a marriage, of course, with the elusive underwater god king Kukulkan. Her family is less than pleased, and Kukulkan's entourage, stuck somewhere between dread and excitement, or Shuri and Namor each navigate their family's reactions to their upcoming union, which is totally not a marriage. An apple a day keeps your annoying relatives away. Heard you got a boyfriend, Eric, Killmonger to his enemies, Eric to the United States government, and Ninjataka to his frustratingly noble cousin strode through the automated the automated doors of Shuri's lab, tossing an apple in the air casually. How's my favorite cousin? He asked by way of greeting. Shuri narrowed her eyes at his entrance. She was wearing goggles over her petite face, which made her eyes appear several times larger than they actually were. It made for a slightly disconcerting effect that Eric might have teased her for if he hadn't already gotten better ammunition. How am I your favorite cousin? Eric shrugged. Have you tried to stab me yet? Shuri gave him a look that told him she was still thinking about it. And he's not my boyfriend, said the princess primly and neatly, the way a princess should sound. It is an alliance. She cast an irritated glance over at Eric, who continued to smirk at her. And don't eat in my lab. Eric held his one free hand up. I won't make a mess, he said, leaning against one of the shiny metal tables. He picked up one of Shuri's gadgets and examined the device. It looked like one of the Kamoyo bracelets that everyone here seemed to wear. Smooth black beads, cool to the touch, decorative, but it wasn't quite Eric's style. No matter, it wasn't as if he was allowed his own pair anyways. Don't touch, said Shuri, who'd finally looked up from her table, where she seemed to be soldering something. She waved the soldering iron in Eric's direction. Watch where you wave that thing, Lucas, said Eric, almost jovially, despite the threat of the heated power tool. So, he sat at the stool nearest Shuri, who wrinkled her nose and perceptibly took a step away. Tell me about this boyfriend. He a mermaid or something? He's not my boyfriend, repeated Shuri archly. It is an alliance. She punctuated every word with a jab of her soldering iron in Eric's direction. Eric was undeterred by the present danger. He had, after all, been subject to worse treatment, tossed and shot at, and stabbed by people he thought he trusted. Peace was a stranger to Eric. Wakanda was unnervingly quiet, like the calm before the storm, but nary a cloud in the sky. He wasn't used to sleeping with his back to the door, so of course he had to stir up chaos somewhere, and where else would he receive such an entertaining reaction but from his youngest and favorite cousin? Everybody in Wakanda was boring. No amount of provocation was enough to ruffle them. I don't know, said Eric, drawing out the last word, enjoying the way Shuri's eyes narrowed to slits, cat-like in their anger. You're spending a whole lot of time together. Secretly, may I add. And you're awfully cagey about all this. Shuri slammed his soldering iron down. In spite of the Princess Black Panther enhanced strength, neither the tool nor the table broke. Instead, the vibranium rattled loudly, sending a shockwave through the lab. That knocked Eric off his seat. For the first time since he'd arrived in her space, Shuri smiled. Don't you have someone else to bother? It's not bothering, replied Eric, as he bit back a groan at the pain that echoed through his lower back. He'd been stripped of his own Black Panther abilities upon his recovery, and it always showed at the worst times. I'm showing concern. Well, said Shuri, crossing her arms over her chest, I'm sure brother is very concerned about where you are right now. Her smile grew wider at the panic on Eric's face. Now let's not be hasty here. Eric held his hands in front of her. the same way one would try to ward off a particularly perturbed animal whose hackles had been raised defensively. Yes, let's, said Shuri, a note of glee in her voice. Spend less time talking about my boyfriend and more time talking about why you aren't helping brother with his community outreach projects. Eric sighed, sensing that his younger cousin had at least won this round. However, at the smug look on Shuri's face, he couldn't help but to add, You called him your boyfriend. Well, Eric thought, as Shuri chased him out of the lab, cursing his every ancestor. Weren't they technically her ancestors too? It sure beat hanging out with T'Challa. Why don't you go pick a fight with someone your own size? Please, said Kukulkan. Khan. Do not pick a fight with the Wakandan delegates, and especially not with the Black Panther. At the grin that crossed Atuma's face, Kukulkan Khan lifted a hand to cut him off before the man could speak. Neither of the Black Panthers. Atuma's shoulders sagged. What good was an alliance if you couldn't engage in a few fisticuffs with your allies? It was always good to learn new techniques, unlike his colleague Namuri, who had chosen to keep her distance from the Wakandan princess. Atuma was slightly more intrigued by the girls' culture, particularly those of their warriors. The Dor Milaje, the princess had called them, were an elite group of female warriors who served the Black Panthers, and they wielded spears. Spears! Atuma, though he wasn't keen on the idea of the alliance himself, wanted to know if these warriors were really as good as the princess had claimed they were. Are you not curious? He asked Kukulkan, Khan, to see how these land dwellers fight? Kukulkan Khan barely looked up from the mural he was painting. Atuma glanced at it, inquisitive. It was a beautiful piece, just like everything Kukulkan Khan painted, depicting his god king locked in combat with. Is that a panther you are fighting, Kukulkan Khan? Kukulkan Khan froze, the paintbrush in his hand hovering over the mural. Black paint dripped off the end of the brush onto the floor. Atuma stepped back to avoid the splash and grimaced, knowing he would hear no end of it from the housekeepers later. It is a panther, said Kukulkan Khan slowly, his tone even in the same way he might speak to a council. You have fought the Black Panthers? No, said Kukulkan Khan. If Atuma didn't know better, he would have sworn he heard the man scoff. But Kukulkan Khan didn't scoff. Scoffing was the act of a liar. Kukulkan Khan would have cut the liar down, either with his words or his spear, identifying each deception before. I have fought one of the Black Panthers, he finished, with a flick of his wrist. Kukulkan Khan resumed painting the mural. This time, he carefully outlined points of gold on the panther with a steady hand. Were it anyone else, Atuma might have challenged them to fight themselves, a fight with the Black Panther, the land-dwelling protector of legend. It would be an honor even to lose to them. How was it? Asked Atuma, breathless. He felt very much like a child again, listening to his elders tell the story of a Kukulkan Khan waging war against the colonizers. It was fine, said a Kukulkan Khan, non-committal. A good fight. Just good? Atuma asked, a note of suspicion in his voice. Usually, Kukulkan Khan never failed to deliver on the finer points of his battles, even waxing poetic about such insignificant things as the position of the clouds in the sky or the exact pitch of his opponent's screaming. Atuma had never before had reason to doubt his leader, but his unwillingness to divulge something he was typically so enthusiastic about had him doubtful. It was a draw, continued Kukulkan Khan. The princess and I were evenly matched. Ah, Atuma nodded sagely. You fought the princess. He looked between the mural and his leader, noticing the fastidiousness with which Kukulkan whitened the teeth of the Black Panther or touched up the gold at their nape. Namora had warned him about this behind closed doors, but Atuma had shook his head at her insistence, thinking her silly for even suggesting a thing. Suddenly everything made sense. Then the princess must be a skilled warrior, Atuma said, watching the way a smile slowly spread over Kukulkan's face. She is, said the man, his eyes bright with fervor. She is fierce and very resourceful, he continued. I would never have thought to throw sand in the eyes of my opponent to distract them, but the princess did it without hesitation. Did you know that when we first met, I threatened her? Asked the Kukulkan. Atuma knew that he did, but still shook his head anyways, not wanting to burst his bubble. And do you know what she did? Atuma continued shaking his head, starting to grow dizzy. She said she would turn me into fish jerky, said Kukulkan proudly, almost puffing out his chest. Of course, she had to explain to me that jerky is a type of meat that land dwellers eat. They dry it out so that it lasts longer, and the process involves... At Atuma's incredulous look, Kukulkan immediately snapped his mouth shut. It was a good fight, he repeated. Still, the shine hadn't left his eyes. Sensing that his leader was in a good mood, Atuma decided now was probably the best time to ask, so, can I at least challenge the Dora Milaje? Big Brother knows best. I think he's too old for you. Shuri's elder brother, clad in his Black Panther outfit from the neck down, watched his sister with worried eyes as she fluttered around him, tisking every now and then. I think you are too old to be borrowing people's possessions and not returning them in the same condition that you took it. Shuri gestured to the destroyed beads on her table. They flickered sadly, a vivid purple light that flared bright, only to follow up with a weak, glowing pulse. And it's not like we're getting married, continued Shuri. It's an alliance. We are simply sharing our knowledge for the betterment of our two nations. The words sounded oddly rehearsed coming out of her mouth, as if they'd been practiced in the mirror many times before. T'Challa felt like wringing his hands together, but resisted the urge. It wasn't as if this alliance was a bad idea. On the contrary, T'Challa thought it was a brilliant move, so characteristic of his little sister, to suggest the partnership. He just wasn't sure if he wanted her to be the one spearheading it. Do you not trust me, brother? Shuri asked, beseeching, and she pulled the trust card. Of course, T'Challa trusted his sister, smart, resourceful, and brave. He knew she could be counted on to protect him, just as he had always protected her. For the first time, there were two Black Panthers existing together. A feat of cooperation, they called it. Blasphemous, others said. But T'Challa knew he couldn't always be there to protect. Wakanda needed a shield just as it needed a sword. Besides, what good was a king who didn't trust his subjects, let alone a brother who did not trust his own sister? How effective a ruler was he if he did not listen to the concerns of his people, with an attentive ear and an open heart? I do trust you, said T'Challa, without missing a beat. I am sorry if it sounded like I doubted you. Shuri waved away his apology, never one to linger on platitudes. You would like him, I think. The Kukulkan? Just Kukulkan. She poked at T'Challa's midsection, frowning when the area did not light up accordingly. He cares for his people deeply, she continued. I think you have a lot in common. Excuse me? T'Challa chatted lightly, but there was no heat in his words. I fight fully clothed. From what I hear, this Kukulkan is always half naked. Well, I hardly notice. Shuri shot back, poking a little harder than necessary. Do you? T'Challa playfully rolled his eyes, never missing a chance to tease his little sister. The tips of Shuri's ears went pink, but T'Challa, who knew when to press and when to let things slide, did not point this out to his sister. The voice of reason. Namora entered Kukulkan's quarters, This time her god king was staring at an array of jade stones, holding them up to the emerald-hued light filtering through the natural crevices in his caved room. Most of most he frowned at and tossed into the corner of his room where Nomura saw a pile of stones growing concerningly large. Few of the stones merited a nod and were placed into another much smaller pile, with more care than he had bestowed upon the others. "How can I help you, my child?" her god king asked, his attention still fixed upon his piles. "It's about the alliance." Nomura spoke carefully, knowing she was treading delicate ground. It wasn't that she disliked the princess. Dislike implied an intimacy between the two that Nomura did not even think of entertaining. But she mistrusted all land dwellers on principle, and even one of the Black Panthers was not immune to this treatment. "And what of it?" Kukulkan's voice grew infinitesimally colder, though the relaxed set of his shoulders told Nomura she hadn't been dismissed. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" she asked, foregoing her decision to choose her words after the utmost deliberation. She was never the one to doubt her own choices. Anyways, she saw and she acted. Her initiative and drive were a driving force behind her rapid ascension to one of Kukulkan's most trusted generals. Kukulkan paused in his assessment of the stones. He turned around, and though Nomura could sense apprehension in the stiffened set of his shoulders, he still gestured for her to sit. Nomura remained standing. "Tell me your doubts," said Kukulkan. "I don't trust them," said Nomura, echoing the same sentiment she heard others express, an attitude that grew louder with every visit Kukulkan made to the surface. She knew he had tried his best to quell these insecurities, but Nomura still wanted him to address them directly. "I understand your fears," said Kukulkan, "but we cannot let our doubts hold us back." Nomura only nodded, still not convinced. As if he sensed her hesitation, Kukulkan continued, "And I do not entirely trust the Wakandans either." Nomura's head snapped up. "Then why?" "Because my partnership is with the princess," answered Kukulkan, "and I do trust that she will not do anything that could endanger her people." Nomura mulled over his words. There was truth to what he had said. Namora had only met the princess a handful of times, but she could sense that she, like Kukulkan, was someone who cared deeply for her people. That much was clear in the way she spoke so proudly of her homeland. "Now tell me," said Kukulkan, holding an array of jade in his hands. "Which of these do you think will look best on Shuri?" "Not my circus, not my monkeys." The fishman in Baku's words were punctuated by the carrot in his mouth, which he crunched with great relish. "Do not," said Shuri, not even glancing up from her workbench. The tone of her voice was a warning enough. Mbaku turned around and walked right out of Shuri's lab. "I got it from my mama." Even though she was the mother of not one but two Black Panthers, Ramonda was still in possession of a very particular set of skills that eluded her children. Those skills, of course, included knowing exactly what her children were thinking and what sorts of mischief they were getting up to when they thought her back was turned. Ramonda whisked into Shuri's lab, her heavy coat swishing around her feet. At her entrance, Shuri immediately quieted the deafening music. "Mother," she said, inclining her head at her mother's approach. "Shuri," Ramonda replied by way of greeting. "What is it, mother?" Shuri's eyes were wide, innocent, but Ramonda knew this girl better than she knew herself. Even as a child, Shuri had been endlessly curious, which, when combined with the kind of childlike bravery that tended to abate with age. Though, Ramonda thought, maybe this wasn't the case with her daughter. Was enough to whiten the hair of any mother, Shuri would never turn down the opportunity to learn about a new culture that had existed alongside vibranium for the perpetuity of their being. Although it did help that their leader was a handsome man with dark, thoughtful eyes and a melodious voice, who was definitely mesmerized by her daughter, despite the latter's insistence to the contrary. Of course, thought Ramonda, when she had laid eyes upon the God King for the first time, of course he was captivated by Shuri. Her beautiful, brave, intelligent daughter, sharper than any Dora Milaje's spear, brighter than the most luminous deposits of vibranium, could only be matched by someone of her caliber. Though this agreement of the God King's assessment of her daughter had been tempered by fear, Shuri was an adult, that much was clear. But before she was the Black Panther, before Princess, before even Inventor, she was Ramonda's daughter, and she did not want to lose her. Even T'Challa, who had initially been as weary of the Kukulkan as Ramonda was, eventually warmed up to the man. He is a good leader, her eldest son had told her, and I think this experience will be good for Shuri. Mother? Her daughter's voice broke her out of her reverie. Shuri watched her with concerned eyes, her warm hand on her arm. Ramonda covered her daughter's hand with her own. I am very proud of you, she said. Shuri rolled her eyes rather dramatically, but Ramonda knew this bravado was a front for her bashfulness. Well, of course you are, said Shuri, not quite making eye contact with Ramonda. I have accomplished much. She looked up, meeting her mother's gaze with her own. And I will accomplish much more, she said. The determined set of her expression reminded Ramonda very much of the little girl who had once said she would develop a magic. Not magic, Mama. Bracelet, capable of practically anything. Ramonda rubbed absent-mindedly at the Komoyo beads adorning her wrist. I am just thinking about how much I will miss you. Shuri scoffed at her mother, but her face was quickly schooled into one of innocence as Ramonda's warning glare. I will not be gone forever, Mother. Still, Ramonda took her daughter's hand into her own. I will always miss you when you are not here. Shuri visibly softened at her words. I will divide my time between Talokan and Wakanda, she promised. Kukulkan and I want to learn about each other's cultures and share our knowledge, not squirrel it away for nobody to benefit from. Ramonda did not reply, still regarding her daughter with worried eyes. Brother said it was a good idea, said Shuri. Ramonda sighed. As long as you give me some warning before you start to have grandchildren. At this, Shuri sputtered incoherently, and in that moment she wasn't the fearsome Black Panther, or the gracious princess, or even the genius inventor, but Shuri. Ramonda's beloved daughter, and she loved her all the more for it. Some men just want to watch the world burn. Why does everyone think we're getting married, of all things? I haven't the faintest clue, Princess. I mean, just because it involves a formal ceremony in which we gift each other jewelry and sign a certificate and exchange vows. And exchange vows doesn't mean it's a marriage. I have told my generals 1,000 times that it is only an alliance, nothing more. I have told my family that I am not marrying you. We're just becoming partners for the foreseeable future. You know, Princess. Oh, Bast. It kind of does sound like we're getting married. End of story.